Hey guys, let's get straight to the point. What you're watching is what I filmed using the X100V and the Zhiyun Crane M3 gimbal. I'm really surprised by the image quality coming out of the X100V because a lot of people said that this camera is only for photos, but it's not made for video. But as you can see, the image quality is amazing. And I'll show you guys what I did to the image to make it look like this, because the straight out of camera image doesn't really look like this, but with some basic color grading, you can definitely achieve something like this. And I'm very happy with the result. And my friend was really happy with the result as well. The reason why there's no music is because of copyright. I can't show the music, I can't put the music into this video, but if you want to watch the actual video, we'll try to post it on our Instagram account, and so definitely follow us on Instagram. So let's get straight to the color grading process that I did. As you know, the X100V only records 8-bit footage, so that is not the strongest codec when it comes to color grading. A lot of people would say that like once you start color grading the image will start breaking down very quickly. This was recorded on the X100V, nothing else, just X100V, no external recorder, but I do have a quarter strength Black Pro Mist filter on the X100V, and we'll get into that later. So this is the project that I have in Final Cut Pro. I use Final Cut Pro for editing mainly, but color grading I usually use DaVinci Resolve, but I didn't want to bother going into DaVinci to color grade this 8-bit footage and move back to Final Cut Pro to edit the video. So that's why we are editing and color grading in Final Cut Pro. Let me show you this image right here to make it a little bit easier for you to understand what's before and after the color grading using Final Cut Pro on this X100V 8-bit footage. I'm gonna turn off all the effects that I did on this image and show you the straight out of camera image. This was the straight out of camera image coming out of the X100V. I know I kind of messed up the white balance because I set it to 5600 Kelvin on a cloudy day. I should have set it to a cloudy day white balance, but as you can see, the color is really cool, really bluish kind of tint on the image right now, and there's not much contrast because I was using the Eterna profile on the X100V to get the most dynamic range on the camera. I didn't use F-Log because there's no way that I can color grade F-Log without breaking the image because of the 8-bit codec. So let me show you again. This is before color grading and editing the colors, not editing, but color grading. As you can see, I add in a lot of contrast, a lot more color. I warm it up and I fixed a lot of colors in the image, but you can tell that the image is not breaking down at all. This is holding up really well. Even if I zoom it into 200%, you can see that nothing was really breaking. And I couldn't tell that this was an 8-bit footage at all. By the way, this was recorded in 1080p only, not even 4K. So this is very impressive. As I said before, a good 1080p footage is better than a bad 4K image, if that makes sense. Because a lot of camera tells you that they can record in 4K, 6K, 8K, 12K, even on a smartphone, but it doesn't mean that they're good quality 4K, 8K, 12K. But a good 1080p coming out of the camera will be way better looking than a bad 4K. I just want to prove that point. So let's go straight into my color grading process. I'll turn off all the effects that I add in, and I will show you how I made this image into the previous image that I showed you. So the first color grading process I usually do is by using color wheels in Final Cut Pro. This is the easiest. I don't use other things like color board or color curves. I do use hue saturation curves a lot too, but I usually use color wheels for the first step. What I did was I added a lot of contrast in the midtone. As you can see, I pulled the midtone down by a lot, and I pulled down the highlight as well. That depends on how you lit up the scene when you're filming the video. So as you can see, on the left hand side we have the RGB Parade. I believe this one is called Parade. Oh no, this is called RGB Overlay. So this one shows you what's exposed, how the colors are exposed in the image, and if anything is overexposed or underexposed. You can see that some information is losing because I underexposed this image to protect the highlight. You can see that in the shadows part, some shadows are being crushed, but that's okay, because a lot of times people are really afraid of, not afraid of, but they tend to lift the shadow to show people that everything is clear, even in the darkest part of the image. To be honest with you, you don't really have to do that all the time. I don't mind crushing some shadows just to protect the highlight so nothing is overexposed. If I overexpose an image, I can't recover that information. But if you underexpose an image, you can still kind of lift up the shadows to get some information back, because the modern sensors on cameras are really good at that. So I underexposed the image. You can see that nothing was overexposed, and most of the information is very, very dark. So by lowering the highlight even more and also increasing the contrast, and I did lower the shadows as well. I also added in some saturation in the midtones and lowered the saturation in highlights and shadows. So this is what happened after I did that. You can see that the image is even more compressed by looking at the RGB overlaid graph. I did not fix any colors in terms of the color temperature and the tint here, but I think I did it in the next one. So in Color Wheels 2, I have added in some warmth in the midtones area by pulling this dot over to the warmer side of the color wheel. And I also changed up the white balance and a color tint because I was filming in the wrong white balance. That was my fault. But surprisingly, the X100V image can actually hold up even after I added in so much warmth in the image. Usually in 8-bit footage, if you tweak the white balance by a lot, it will just start breaking down and it will look like really bad. So if I turn this effect on, you can see that the entire image is completely different from before. It's much warmer than before. If I uncheck it, this is before, this is after. So I have added in a lot of warmth into the image. By adding a lot of yellow in the color temperature side, I have to balance it with tint, because if I add in a lot of yellow, it will start making the image look kind of green. So I have to balance it with adding in a lot of, not a lot, but some magenta to balance that. And then I added in some warmth in the midtones just to give a little bit more warmth to the skin tone, because usually skin tone is where the midtone lies on. You can see that on the chart. This is my friend's skin tone area. It's about 50 IRE, and I've added in some warmth into that part of the image. Let's go straight to the next one. The next color wheel is basically a stylish color wheels that I use usually to create a look in the video. So I have added in some more colors in the image. I did not touch the temperature and tint anymore because I fixed that in the previous color wheels. And now I have added in some teal green tone into the darkest shadows of the image just to make that concrete and steel look even crunchier, I would say, higher contrast by adding in some teal and green into the shadows. And I have to balance it actually by dragging the midtones to even warmer compared to before, or else the skin tone will start be affected by the shadows teal tint. So I'm just going to turn this on, and you can see that we have added in a lot of teal tone into the steel, and also a little bit to my friend's clothing. We'll talk about that very soon. And I've added in some orange tone into the skin tone just to balance that effect out. So without that, it will look really wonky. So this is without adding in the orange into the mid-tone. My friend's skin is being affected by the teal as well. So remember, to balance it out by dragging the midtone to the opposite of what you drag the shadows into. So that's a stylish look kind of color grading that I've created. Next one is very simple. This one I do it all the time because as you can see here, we have a lot of teal and green sipping into the clothing of my friend's outfit. So I would use the hue saturation curve just to fix that. What I would usually do is I'll go to Luma versus saturation. That means this one is affecting the saturation of the luminance, which is super confusing, like Luma versus sat. I don't know why they just don't name it as saturation of luminance. Anyway, so I'm affecting the saturation of certain brightness part of the image. So on the left-hand side, as you can see here on the chart, we have the shadows, middle is midtone, the right side is the highlight. So whatever that I do to drag the curve down to the bottom, that means that brightness part of the image is being affected. The saturation will go up and down if I drag this dot up and down. So before I do this adjustment, as I said, we have a lot of teal sipping into the darkest part of the image, including my friend's outfit. But by doing this, we cleaned up the entire image. You can see that my friend's black clothing, it's black now. There's still some teal in her clothing, but I don't mind that because if we drag another dot lower just to make sure that the entire cloth is like completely colorless, then it will be really unnatural. So I kept that. I usually would create a dot right here and just drag the darkest part of the image to desaturate it completely, just to clean the image. I usually use this to clean the entire image because a lot of people, when they wear like dark clothing, and it will be affected by your stylish kind of color grading. So that's what I would do. Sometimes I will drag the second dot lower to see if I need that to desaturate even more part of the image, but don't do that too much. As I said before, don't go too far when it comes to color grading. Make sure that it still looks natural to you. And if you drag this dot too far, let's say the second dot too far, sometimes it will start affecting the skin tone and some other part of the image that's supposed to have saturation, but you make it like completely colorless. So don't do that too much. I would suggest just drag one dot down, and that's pretty much will do the trick. After that, I added in some film grain. In Final Cut Pro, the film grain, it's not as sophisticated as DaVinci Resolve. You can choose like pretty much like any kind of film grain in the history, but in Final Cut Pro, they only have the standard one. When you first add this in, you won't be able to tell like how much film grain I added in because the screen is really small right now. But when you blow up the image to a bigger size, you will see the grain that we have added in. It's really subtle, but really effective. So definitely add that. When you first add in film grain, it will be iMovie film grain, which is like really wonky for whatever reason. It's also affecting the color of the image for whatever reason. So always choose realistic or else your color grade will be completely off. And I believe when you first add in the film grain, for some reason, it's like at 100%, which is really grainy. So I would suggest you to try to set it at around like 20, maximum 30%, depends on the style that you want to create. But for something like this, like a modern project, I will just do 20%. And it's completely natural and it looks great. The next and the last thing that I did to the image to make it look like the final image that I had or I showed you before is to add in the letterbox, which is the two black bars at the top and bottom, just to isolate the subject in the middle. I really like using this kind of wider aspect, even if I'm not using an anamorphic lens on, let's say on my BMP-CC 4K camera. The X100V has a fixed lens, and it's a spherical for photos mainly. So they never had those like black bars at the top and bottom. I use this to isolate the subject and try to get rid of anything that is distracting at the top and the bottom of the image. I feel like here I don't really need more stairs, and so that's why I added in the black bars. And same thing with the other part of the video. It looks cool. It looks good because it's a wider aspect ratio. I feel like the leading lines on, I'm sorry that I'm pointing the computer with my hand, I should use my mouse. So I feel like the leading line really got enhanced when I put in the black bars. So that's why I added in. Sometimes I'll do 16:9, but a lot of times I will do the aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1, which is kind of weird. I think the anamorphic standard is 2.39 to 1, but for some reason Final Cut Pro doesn't have it. So this is what I usually do. Just 2 black bars, that's it. Wider aspect ratio for especially dance videos, because I do a lot of dance video projects. So with a whole bunch of dancers, a wider aspect ratio usually look better to me, because if I don't do this, there will be a lot of really distracting elements. Let me turn this off to show you. As you can see, we have a lot more buildings in the image. It's kind of like, okay, it's not really adding in that much in terms of the impact that I want to create. So I will do the letterbox, and this is what it looks like after color grading, cleaning the image, adding film grain, and the letterbox. If I turn this completely off, all the effects off, this is what happened. The image looks okay. It's not as impactful because the contrast is not there, and the entire image is kind of scattered around when you look at the RGB overlay, and it's not that strong. Usually I will compress it a lot and add in saturation and color it stylishly, so you can see that everything is pretty much compressed, and the skin tone is still nothing above 50 because of the vibe that I want to create in this video, a really darker vibe. If it's like brighter, I would say push the skin tone to around 70-75 IRE, but nothing more than that, or else it will look really amateur. A lot of movies are really compressed if you look at their graphs, so that's why this is what I was going for. So that's the process of me color grading the image coming out of the X100V, and I was super impressed by the image quality, and I was really surprised because it doesn't look 8-bit to me at all. I was comparing it to my usual camera for video projects, which is my BMPCC 4K with anamorphic lens, and it films, the BMPCC 4K takes, I think, 12-bit raw images, and this is only 8-bit. But I really don't think there's any problem with this, because I think they did a good job. Fujifilm did a good job in terms of color, and all the colors that they have included in an image really helps to allow people to color grade it even when it's 8-bit. Because I remember when I was filming with my Sony a7 III and my Canon EOS R, they all film in 8-bit. And when I try to color grade them, they do break down. Like, I do see a lot of like patches and like bending, and all the artifacts starts showing up when you add in like a color to stylize your image. So that's why this was really, really surprising. And another reason why I think this image looks this good is because of the Black Pro Mist filter. I had a quarter strength Black Pro Mist filter on my X100V all the time. I have another video before that I talked about it, but I thought it was only good for photos, but surprisingly, it's really good for video, because the Black Pro Mist filter, the main purpose of having that is to smoothen the image. So basically to blur out the image, if you want to call it that way, because on digital cameras nowadays, they are so, the images coming out of the modern day cameras are so sharp that every pixel is basically by themselves, like super detailed pixels. And when they are besides each other, let's say the pixels with different shades of colors besides each other, if they're only 8-bit, they're really kind of like, how should I say it? Like the edges are really sharp that if you change one pixel, it'll be really obvious that like this pixel is now different from this. But with the Black Pro Mist filter, it actually blends them into not one pixel, but they they get blend together really well, and it smoothen out everything, including, of course, the most important, skin tone. And as you can see here, that the entire image looks really, really smooth. No weird artifacts, nothing. Even at areas like this, the walls, here, nothing is breaking. Like the skin tone, it's completely perfect. Unless you zoom it in like 2,000 times. I don't think people do that. So from this kind of distance, it's really great. Black Pearl Mist filter, quarter strength is probably the sweet spot, because 1/8 is a little bit too little. The effect is not as strong, not as obvious, but half is too stylish, too stylized. So that's why 1/4 inch Black Pearl Mist on the X100V really helps with this kind of projects. By the way, if you don't want to color grade your image because it's like too time consuming, or if you don't even have a program that allows you to do what I did before, you can definitely use the classic chrome profile on the X100V because it's much higher contrast and it's much more stylized. It's probably a little bit too contrasty to some people. So if you really don't want to color grade anything, just use either Provia, which is the standard film simulation, or classic chrome if you want it to be a little bit more stylized on your X100V if you don't want to color grade the Eterna profile. Okay, now let's talk about why I think the X100V is great for video besides the image quality. The first reason is, of course, the built-in ND filter. It's so good. It's a 4-stop ND filter that you can just press a button and it will just come up in behind the lens, not in front of the lens, inside the camera, and it will just stop 4 stops of light from coming into the sensor, and it's super effective. What happens is, if you don't have a built-in ND filter, when you're filming, let's say most likely outdoor during the day, you will have to screw on a ND filter onto your lens just to prevent the camera absorbing too much light, because everything will be overexposed unless you stop down the aperture and then you just increase the shutter speed, which will really make the image look really unnatural. And I hate using ND filters on lenses. I hate having to screw on ND filters on lenses. I have a Polar Pro variable ND filter for my other cameras, but I really don't like the process of having to screw on an ND filter in front of the lens, because it takes time to put it on, and also after that you have to adjust your ISO to make sure that the image is properly exposed, and if not, you have to kind of adjust the ND filter again. With the X100V built-in ND filter, a button press, it will just turn on the ND filter. And usually what happens is, if it's a bright sunny day, a 4-stop ND filter it's almost enough to have direct sunlight in front of the camera, but it's not too strong to do that. So you might still have to stop the lens down to, let's say, f2.8 to compensate for the overexposure. But when you are in a darker scene, let's say here, so as you can see here, this is a really dark environment and I still had the ND filter on. You might be surprised because, like, why would you turn on the ND filter when it's a dark environment? The reason is because I wanted to protect the highlights, because my friend's face was kind of overexposed if I don't have the ND filter on, and even setting the camera to ISO 160 didn't really help. So I turned on the ND filter, it got really dark, but don't worry, what happened and what I usually would do is I'll keep the ND filter on and turn the ISO higher just to compensate for that 4 stops of light not coming into the lens. And that way you can actually fine tune your exposure to the way you like. I really want that exposure to be lower compared to having it like properly exposed in the middle kind of. So that's usually what I would do. Because modern day cameras ISO performance is so good that I wasn't even afraid. I think after turning on the ND filter, ISO 160 was super dark, so I turned it to ISO 800. That's nothing to modern day cameras. You can comfortably set it to 1600 or even 3200 ISO. On Fujifilm cameras, they're fine. Just don't go anything higher than 3200 ISO and you will be fine. With other cameras, let's say the Canon C70, I'm sure with the built-in ND filter, you can still crank up the ISO without any problem. So that's the reason why I really love built-in ND filter on the X100V. It helps a lot. It saves me a lot of time. I can go like on and off and on and off just to find the perfect exposure without having to screw on the filter and screw it off and screw it on. And especially when you have to change lenses, then you have to do it all over again with a different lens. So the built-in ND filter is an absolute amazing feature on the X100V, and I think it should be available on all the cameras. So the next thing I want to talk about the X100V is the no IBIS, basically no in-body image stabilization. And a lot of people think that it's not a good thing and it's a con. Yes, it's not a good thing, but with IBIS, usually the in-body image stabilization, it's okay for video if you are doing like a really steady, not moving kind of shot. If you are doing panning, if you pan slowly, it will help. The IBIS will definitely help because I had the GH5 and the X-T4, they both have IBIS, and it worked really well when you are doing like a really slow kind of panning handheld. But if you're doing anything big, like if you're swinging the camera and up and down and moving back and forth, the IBIS is not going to help. First, it's not that great to do for that kind of movement, and also it will actually be worse because the IBIS is basically trying to stabilize a sensor. Let's say the sensor is in the middle of the camera and it's trying to balance the movement and try to stabilize it. But there's an effect that I always call a ping pong effect. If the IBIS is moving, let's say your camera is moving and the IBIS is stabilizing the sensor, if your movement is too big and the edge of the camera is hitting the sensor, let's say that's a limit, right? It will actually bounce the sensor away from the limit part, and it will start having these like jerky movement where the sensor is like bouncing around by itself. So a lot of people, when they are filming videos, especially myself, I don't think I have any cameras that has IBIS anymore, but even if I do, I will turn it off and use a gimbal. That's how I would film, let's say, for example, dance videos, because I know that I have a lot of big movements that I will be doing with the camera, so I will never use the IBIS itself and also with the gimbal, because it will do the ping pong thing even with the gimbal. So you might think that your image is stabilized, but it's actually not because of the ping pong thing. So definitely turn it off if you're filming with a gimbal, and also if you're filming with big movements. So that's my suggestion. So the no IBIS is okay for me on the X100V. I think IBIS is really good for photography. I have no doubt if I have the choice, I would still suggest them adding in the IBIS into the future X106, whatever that is called, VI. So IBIS is good, but if I'm filming, I will turn it off. The next thing I want to talk about is the lens on the X100V. It's a really good lens. It's really good. I know it's a fixed lens on the camera, so you cannot change the focal length. You cannot have different compressions, but it's okay. As you can see here in the video, it's great for mid body kind of shots. With full body shots, it's still good. I think it's still producing really good subject isolation. The background is a little bit blurred out because it's an f2 lens at 35mm full frame equivalent. So it's not super shallow, but it's okay. As I said in my many previous videos, you do not have to blur out everything in the background all the time. So just keep that in mind. I think this is completely fine. The subject isolation is really good, especially when you get closer to like a half body shot. As I said, you can see that the background is being blurred out, but I can still tell what's in the background. That's the purpose of me filming on location. If you want to blur out everything in a video, then what's the point of going to a location? You can use a backdrop and it'll still look fine. So going to a location, I usually don't mind having more things in focus, and that's why you go to a location. And with this, the lens is really sharp as well. Sharper than the previous generation. Of course, this is the new second gen lens on the X100V. So the subject isolation is really good. A lot of movies and TV shows, TV shows are really like deep when it comes to shallow depth of field. Most of the things are in focus, but even for movies, they don't go that shallow. They are usually filmed at like f4, f5.6. I think the only movie that is like super shallow, it's like what, the Army of the Dead? I think that's the name, the zombie movie. That was super shallow and it was super weird watching that movie. It gives me a headache. So don't go super shallow all the time, unless it's a creative choice. Let's say you want to create something super dreamy, sure, but you don't have to. So the f2 35mm full frame equivalent lens on the X100V is definitely good enough in terms of subject isolation, but you won't get the 3D pop. Just keep that in mind, and I don't really need that for this kind of video. And also that lens has, I don't think it has any chromatic aberration at all. As I can tell in scenes like this, the brightest part of the image compared to the darkest part, it's like when they meet, the highest contrast part of the image, I should say, it doesn't have the purple fringing. I didn't do anything to the purple color because in videos it's really hard to remove chromatic aberrations, and the lens did not produce any chromatic aberrations as I can see so far. So that's really important because it's super distracting, and you can tell that the lens is a lower budget lens if they produce a lot of chromatic aberrations. So that's why this lens, absolutely amazing. I have no complaint at all. Another reason is of course the compact size of the X100V with the Zhiyun Crane M3 combo. I could fit it in my Moment Rugged Sling bag, which is about like this big. I could fit everything in there and just carry it like nothing. So this compact size really helps when it comes to filming on location, on the go. If you're filming like travel videos, vlogging, or maybe not vlogging because of autofocus, we'll talk about that. But it's really convenient. It's super convenient compared to, of course, my BMP-CC 4K with like Cine lenses and the DJI RS2 gimbal. That thing is like more than 20 pounds. It's super hard to carry out, to carry like a backpack in order to fit it. Not even everything. I couldn't fit everything in there. So with the X100V and Zhiyun Crane M3, I could carry it all day long without feeling tired at all. So that's why this is amazing. The last thing I want to talk about is a bad thing about the X100V or any Fujifilm camera so far at this moment. Everything is really bad with autofocus coming out of the Fujifilm cameras. The autofocus is not too accurate and precise sometimes, and it drifts a lot. Even when the camera says that there is a face being detected, and it was even showing the eye detection, but it would just drift like for no reason. It would just go to the background, trying to capture, like focus on something in the background instead of the subject that the camera was actually detecting. I saw the eye detection box and the face detection box all the time, even for straight on shots like this. I don't know why, it's just going back and forth to the background and the subject. It is better than Panasonic, but it's still not good. So for longer talking heads kind of videos, don't rely on the autofocus. Please, just don't. Just try to manual focus it and stick with that. And for dance video, it's okay because, or even like music video, it's okay because I will be changing the angle a lot. So I'll be doing a lot of coverage. I'll film the same thing over and over again with different angles. So I didn't have to worry about the autofocus performance because I just don't pick that shot. And I'll just pick something that is mainly in focus. And because Dan's video, the pacing is really fast, so there's not much time for you to really see that out of focus moment, but it is drifting back and forth. Even by when I'm showing you guys the video right now, you can see that it's drifting, and it's okay for Dan's video. As I said, it's completely fine because of the fast pacing. But if you're doing a longer video shoot with like a stable shot, don't rely on the autofocus on the Fujifilm camera because it's not reliable at all. So that I will give to Sony or Canon. They're absolutely amazing when it comes to autofocus, but those cameras are not as compact unless you go with the Sony a7C with a prime lens, but it's still not as compact as this combo. And I'm happy with the color and the Kodak coming out of the Fujifilm X100V, so I have no complaint whatsoever at all. And this is how I would color grade the image coming out of the X100V for a more stylized project. And if you don't need to do that, the color straight out of the camera, it's absolutely amazing. So yeah, I have no complaint. I don't know why people don't think the X100V can record videos, but it can. That's it. Thank you for staying till the end. If you have any questions or comments about this kind of video or tutorial videos like this, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.